Good morning. It's Thursday morning, and we're at Acts 18, verse 24 through 28. Now, a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was an eloquent man, competent in the Scriptures. He'd been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in spirit, he spoke and taught accurately the things concerning Jesus, though he knew only the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. And when he wished to cross to Achaia, the brothers encouraged him and wrote to the disciples to welcome him. When he arrived, he greatly helped those who through grace had believed, for he powerfully refuted the Jews in public, showing by the Scriptures that the Christ was Jesus. Now, this is Apollos in Ephesus, and then he goes over to Greece, and he's a very good speaker, and he's a very good apologist for the Christian faith. But he doesn't have the whole story. And as we're going to learn in 1 Corinthians, he and Paul have a little bit of an issue sometimes. Paul is not pleased with the factions that arise in the church, and some of the factions are based on who you learn the faith from. Well, I learned it from Paul. No, I learned it from Apollos. And Paul says, all of that is wrong. You all learned about Jesus, so let's focus on that. I don't think Paul would be pleased with our denominations today. They all grew out of different historical circumstances. Presbyterians, for instance, grew out of John Calvin's work in Switzerland, through John Knox, and who took that teaching back to Scotland. Meanwhile, later in England, the Church of England was being sort of a renewal movement by the Wesley brothers, and they became the Methodists. And so you have all these different historical reasons for different denominations. And every denomination has its own particular way of emphasis and its own style of government and its own history. And, Luther tried to reform the church and ended up with 29,000 different Protestant denominations. And, you just shake your head and say, well, something is wrong here. And you know the old joke, the first Scotsman off the boat formed First Presbyterian Church, and the second Scotsman off the boat then went down the street and started Second Presbyterian Church, and so it goes. That's the way that we see these things. Here what we see is Apollos is teaching people about Jesus, but he doesn't have the whole story. He doesn't know the entire thing. He knows only the baptism of John. And so tomorrow we're going to talk a little more about that and what that all means. I think what it means for us today, though, is that Apollos doesn't have the entire story, the entire Christian faith. He doesn't have it exactly right. And so Priscilla and Aquila take him aside and say, well, there's some things you need to understand. And they instruct him a little bit. And that reminds us, of course, that these early Christians didn't have TV and radio, and they didn't have copies of the Bible that they could just read, off their phone. They had to read the Scripture that they had, the way that they had it, and learn the way of Jesus from people who knew it, and do the best that they could. And for them, it was certainly not some intellectual affirmations, but it was a way of life. And that's another thing that we should keep in mind. It doesn't matter so much what specifically you believe about this or that. It matters, do you have the way of life? And are you living the way that Jesus has taught us to live? That's the key. So if I have to say anything to you today, it's that. Live the way that Jesus taught us. And have a great day. And we will see you tomorrow with more of the story of Apollos.